So this year, the United States Supreme Court agreed to hear two cases to address how electoral districts are drawn. Both of these cases are a big deal, but for different reasons. Each case is about gerrymandering, which is the practice of drawing district lines with the purpose of influencing an election. But one case deals with racial bias, and the other with partisan bias. So, what's the difference? Racial gerrymandering occurs when mapmakers use race to draw district lines without a good reason to do so, and the reasons are addressed in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was signed into law to ensure fair representation of minorities, particularly black people in the South. The act created a legal basis for the federal government to step in if a state denies or dilutes voting rights for a racial group. This has led states to create some districts with a majority of minority voters. They're intended to give those groups some degree of representation in Congress, and that plan largely worked. In 1964, only 5 congressional districts had black representatives. Today, that number stands at 49. In Cooper versus Harris, the Supreme Court determined that North Carolina disenfranchised minority voters in 2 districts when it redrew its maps in 2011. The new map introduced minority communities to districts 1 and 12. The state argued that they did this to comply with the Voting Rights Act, but the court determined that neither district actually satisfied the provisions that they claimed. So they ruled that these districts were unlawful, and this meant that North Carolina had to redraw its congressional maps ahead of the 2018 election. So that's a case of racial gerrymandering. The Supreme Court will also hear a case on partisan gerrymandering. Partisan gerrymandering occurs when a map is drawn to decrease the influence of a political party. You can see a likely case of partisan gerrymandering when you compare the popular vote of an election with the number of seats won. In 2016, Maryland elected 7 of its 8 congressional seats to Democrats. But the Democratic candidates only earned about 60% of the popular vote, so that's a pretty good indication that the maps are based in part on political affiliation. And this case of Gill versus Whitford deals with a similar disproportion of seats to popular votes, only this time in a state legislature, skewed to favor the Republican Party in Wisconsin. This decision is highly anticipated because it gives the court another chance to define how much partisanship is too much when it comes to redistricting. Distinguishing between partisan and racial gerrymandering can be difficult since minority voters tend overwhelmingly to vote Democrat. And the Voting Rights Act features some rules that were meant to be temporary, but have been extended. But gerrymandering verdicts are watched closely by lawmakers and advocates alike, as redistricting is one of the most consequential events in American politics. It decides whose votes matter and how much.